Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Poetry. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at John Keats' very famous poem, To Autumn. I'm going to take you through the content, some key contextual factors, and lastly, we'll finish up with some form. If you want to have a little look at some analysis of key quotes, there is a video coming your way, so make sure you've subscribed so you'll get the notification. Let's get started. So what is this poem all about? This is a poem that celebrates the season of autumn. It's split into 3 stanzas that each tell a sort of story about a stage of autumn. The first stanza is early autumn, where we look at all of the produce being in abundance and the kind of gifts of nature. The second stanza talks about the harvesting of that produce, and then the third stanza is about the end of autumn and how it transitions into winter. A little bit of context for you. So the poem was written by a very famous romantic poet called John Keats. He was alive from 1795 till 1821. You can see there that he had a very, very short life. Now, as a romantic poet, he was reacting against sort of industrialization and massively celebrated nature. And you can see this thoroughly in all stages of the poem. This is another example of an autobiographical poem. It actually is written because of a walk that he took in Winchester in 1819, and he sort of looked out at nature, the nature around him, and thought how beautiful it was. And he commented, you know, even looking at a field that had sort of been, harvested, and so all you had were the sort of little stubbled crops, and he sort of said how beautiful and how warm it was, and it inspired him to write this poem, To Autumn. Now, what else was going on in 1819? Well, unfortunately, he was nursing his brother who had TB or tuberculosis, and actually, whilst he was nursing his brother in 1891, at the same sort of time as writing this poem, he contracted TB as well, and very sadly passed away in his mid-20s. He, in fact, lost all of his family to tuberculosis. And you'll notice when we start looking at the end of the poem how that tragedy might have influenced the way that he viewed nature. Lastly, let's just talk a little bit about form. As I said before, this is an ode, which basically is the kind of poem that praises or glorifies a subject. Quite often ode is in the title, but not in this one. So he's just called it To Autumn rather than Ode to Autumn. It's largely in iambic pentameter, so it's sort of, loosely that way. But what you might notice is every now and then the stresses in the meter shift. So if you want something fancy to say about form, and I know that you do, you might, for example, have a little look at the openings where we have season of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close-bosomed friend of the maturing sun. Now, those first moments, season and close bosom, that's not in iambic pentameter. What we are using are things called spondees, which are 2 syllables that are both stressed. And so it kind of creates massive emphasis at the very beginning of the poem and on this idea of season, so autumn, and being a close friend of the sun. So it's really stressing the most important parts about the poem, about autumn and its relationship with the sun, and therefore being able to create all of this produce. Another clever thing that I want to talk to you about the form, again, ready for your flashcards, ready set for your essays. It's the number of stanzas and the line lengths, because Keats wrote a number of odes. To Autumn was in fact the last one of the set, and most of his odes have 5 or 8 stanzas, but for some reason in this one he chose to write 3, and his other odes all had 10 lines per stanza, whereas this one has 11. So it breaks the mold in 2 ways. As always, you need to be able to say why, and I think it's clear. He's talking about how autumn has this sort of sense of abundance, this plenitude of nature, of produce, and I think that's why the lines are longer. So there are 11 to demonstrate plenitude. However, There are only 3 stanzas as opposed to 5 or 8, because this poem, as much as it's celebrating nature, is also talking about the brevity of life and the cycle of life. And so the fact that it's short, bearing in mind, currently all of his family are dying around him, and he has also contracted TB, he might be saying something about, yeah, the briefness of life. So that's quite clever as well. You'll notice the rhyme scheme is quite varied, okay? Now, the first 4 lines, of each stanza, you'll notice is an ABAB rhyme scheme, and that's the same in all 3. But then the next 7 set of lines is a variation on this C, D, E, D, C, C, E. There's in the second and third, there's a slight shift there, which is why it's varied. And I think, again, this is about predictability versus unpredictability. The first set of each stanza sort of sets out the intentions of the stanza, like what it's about. And then the last 7 lines elaborate and develop, which I think is why there's variation. But I also think it's about that element of surprise in nature as well, that slight shift. Some very tangible things that you can use there, talking about form, which you know gets you the points in your poetry essays. So do make sure that you've jotted those down on your flashcards for your revision. I hope that helped. Give me a shout in the comments if you've got any questions or want any more details. There is a video coming your way that will be analysing 5 key quotes. So if you haven't subscribed, click that button and then you'll get a notification of when it's ready. That's it from me. Thank you again. Happy revising.